Hi, in this little example, I'm going to illustrate the calculation of standard deviation. We need some data if we're going to calculate a standard deviation. So the data we're going to use is how much interest over time there's been in the search term standard deviation. So I just downloaded this picture from Google Trends. You can see that interest in standard deviation seems to be fluctuating quite a bit. Let's go ahead and scroll up. And let's use this data here. So this is the weekly level of interest in standard deviation ending in 2015 here, first couple weeks of 2015, going back to September. So we've got 20 observations. And we're going to be calculating this formula over here for the standard deviation. And the way to think about this formula is we're going to start from the inside and work our way outside. So the last thing we're going to do is take the square root. The xi's here are our 20 observations, the weekly ratings. From those, we're going to need to subtract the mean. So the first thing we need to do is calculate the mean. So let's go ahead and we'll call it the mean. And we have to remember that the way we calculate the mean in Excel is we take the average. So we're going to go ahead and take the average of those 20 numbers, and that works out to be 69.3. So that's our number x bar there, 69.3. Now we're going to go ahead and calculate these deviations from the mean. So let's go ahead, let's call this deviation from the mean. And so for each one of the observations, so there's 82, I need to subtract off the mean, which is 69.3. And I'm going to go ahead and type 69.3 rather than use the cell reference so you can see exactly what I'm doing. So I'm taking the difference between this observation and the mean of 69.3. And I'm going to do that for all 20 observations. So these are the deviations from the mean, and as you can see, some of them are positive, some of them are negative, as they have to be. Some weeks were above average, some weeks were below average. Now we need to square those deviations. So let's go ahead and call these squared deviation from the mean. All right, and again, just so that you can see exactly what I'm doing here, rather than just square column E, I'm going to take the values there, subtract off 69.3. Remember, that was the average. And let's go ahead and square that. So that's the squared deviation. Now, of course, this 161.29 is just what I would get if I squared the deviation from the mean. So this is just the square of that. So here are my squared deviations. So these are my values, xi minus x bar, and I've got 20 of those. And I've squared those, xi minus x bar squared. I've got 20 of those squared deviations. Now the next thing I need to do is add them up. That's what that symbol there is telling me to do. So let's call this the sum. And we'll go ahead and just add up those values. Okay. Now the next thing I need to do is divide by one less than the number of observations that I've got. I've got 20 weeks of data, so that means I'm going to divide by 19 here. All right, so let's go ahead and take that number and divide it by 19. What does that give me? Well, that number is the variance. Remember, before I take the square root in this quantity here, I'm getting the variance, and then the standard deviation should be the square root of that thing. All right, now let's make sure that I got the, let's make sure I got that right. So let's go ahead and use the Excel function for the variance. No, I don't want to do it on those, sorry. I want to go back to my original data. So we'll take the variance of the original data, and we'll take the standard deviation of the original data, and indeed those match the values that I had by manual calculation. So walking through it once again, we take the data, we calculate the sample mean, then we took the deviations from the mean, then we took the squared deviations from the mean, we added those up, we divided by n minus 1 to get the variance, and then finally we took the square root to get the standard deviation. And that number 21.33 is a measure of how much these numbers have been fluctuating. In other words, how much interest in the term standard deviation has been varying over time.